Okay, I guess we're ready to start. I want to welcome everybody to this third seminar of the spring series about design and innovation. And I want to welcome today's speaker, Professor Alice Agogino. It's our pleasure to have her here today. Probably most of you already know about Professor Agogino. She's a Roscoe and Elizabeth Hughes Professor in Mechanical Engineering, but she's also affiliated with many entities on campus: the Haas School of Business, the Gender and Women's Studies, Studies in Engineering, Science and Mathematics Education, and Engineering Resources Group. And maybe I forgot some of them. She's a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and she's the recipient of many teaching and research best papers awards. And she collaborates with more than 50 companies in the Bay Area and no-profit organization on multiple design projects. And it's really our pleasure to have her here today. And here I'll talk about valuing design.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate those of you showing up on the last day of classes for the semester on Friday, so thank you. What I thought about is a general talk about what we should value in design and what you think about what's important in design for the Jacobs Institute, how we might measure it, and how we might strategically move forward in thinking about how we would value design. So what I thought I would go over is some aspects of design that can be measured and can be valued, and some aspects of design that can't be, and what some of the contextual issues are. And then I was just going to show some examples of a few projects that I've been involved with. I like this quote because I think this tells you what's happening with design thinking and the emphasis of design starting around 2000. Fast Company, for instance, this is their quote, 1999. Everywhere you look today, design has taken on new meaning. Design is critical to business. The trick for all business people today is to learn to think like designers. And then design thinking became a big issue. Who invented design thinking, by the way? Who? Why do you say that?
Because I'm an architect.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say it's an architect, actually. A lot of people think of design thinking associated with IDEO. And so I just want to set the record straight on design thinking. Actually, I start with Herb Simon's Sciences of the Artificial. He said design is a way of thinking. And as someone who did her early research in artificial intelligence, I really think of design thinking. This is a seminal reference for me with Herb Simon. But Peter Rowe, an architect from MIT, actually wrote a book in 1987 that I think is the first, public publication with design thinking in the title. And what I liked about his book is that he also gave credit to Horst Riddle in terms of wicked problems and its association with design thinking. And Horst Riddle was a member of the UC Berkeley faculty in architecture and did a lot of work on design research. And then that went to Delft University to a design thinking symposium in 1991. Richard Buchanan connected wicked problems in design thinking in a Design Issues Journal in 1992. So when did IDEO start using the word design thinking? Well, this is 2000, around 2000. This is The Art of Innovation with Tom Kelly, and a lot of IDEO's work for design thinking post-dates that. And they've done a wonderful job of developing and publicizing and teaching design theory, but just wanted to set the record straight in terms of some of the history of design thinking, and for sure, its Berkeley roots. Okay, so how do we measure design? How do you in your classes measure design? What are some of the ways you measure design? You can't. Yes. Go ahead.
Can I?
Yeah.
All right.
Fierce.
Well, on a paper with...
Do we need to give him a...
No, we don't have to. Okay. Hi, how y'all doing? My name is Pierce Gordon, master's PhD student in the Energy and Resources Group, and with a paper alongside Alice and Mark Few over there. How you doing? We, using the framework of Open IDEO, created tangible methods to measure how well human-centered design was conducted by the different designers all across 4 different challenges that are on the website.
And I'm going to say a bit more about it.
Cool.
So you don't need to go into the details.
All right. Cool.
So one way of measuring good design is the process that led to the design, though, right? Okay, what are other ways to measure the value of design? I mean, how do you do it? Yes?
Design awards?
Design awards.
It's the quality of the experience that the user has in terms of recognizing, understanding, and using the product that has been designed.
So very human-centered design. It was a good experience. And not only was it a good experience, it was used, right?
Yes.
I mean, my number one rule in good design is it gets used. Okay, what other ways to measure? Yeah?
Meantime between failure.
Meantime between failure, so kind of a performance metrics of good design. Yeah?
It should be evocative.
Evocative. Now, you're architecture, right? So, yeah. So oftentimes the critical acclaim is very important. You mean to produce some kind of emotion associated with the design. Yeah?
Did it introduce a new item, innovative idea that made it better functional for intended purposes?
It serves the, excuse me, it serves the intended purpose, right?
And has innovative, one innovative idea, something that pushes the design a little further, not repeating the same thing that someone else has done.
Okay, so one measure of design is its innovativeness, its difference, its creativeness. Okay, good. Yeah?
So you can also quantify that, I think, through specifications as well. Is there a transformative spec? Can it just push the envelope in terms of a capability that's not been realized quantitatively?
Okay, okay, all good, yeah?
Who buys it, how much they're willing to pay?
Who buys it and how much money does that design make for the company? Sure. Anything else? So what I thought is I would briefly cover some of the topics that you have very thankfully given me to cover in the class. I'm going to start out with usage. Now, this got a lot of critical acclaim, and it maybe evokes a feeling in you. I saw this. I frequent a website called RealReal, which is used designer clothing, and I saw this, and I said, I've got to get it. It will go perfectly with the dress that I have. So I bought it. Here it is. I put it on. I can wear it. I can get it on my feet, but I cannot walk in it, for sure. So a lot of designs are bought, but never used. And so I think number one rule of good design is its use. Now, I do use this as bookends in my bookcase in my office. So number one, it gets used. And then there are a lot of technology designs that are very good technologies, but don't get used either. So who has actually controlled their thermostat and set it? A few of you have. Jer, I know you would have. I work in smart lighting, and the research shows that in smart lighting, 50% of smart buildings that have smart lighting installed are turned off, don't work at all. And 50% of those that actually work are below capacity, probably working at 50% capacity, including Siddhartha Dai Hall. Has anyone tried to control the lights in Siddhartha Dai Hall? It's almost impossible to do. And so there was a group of designers and engineers from Apple that decided we can design a better thermostat and started the Nest company. Good design, easy to use, gives you the feedback you want. And the reason I like to bring this up is to show you Roby DeMonch there, who was one of the students in our classes. He comes back as a coach. He comes back to help with workshops in the team. He, with a group of the engineers, left to start Nest. Nest then got sold to Google for, what, $2 or $3 billion. He paid off his student loans and then went back to Apple. So I think this is an example of someone we would like to associate and graduate from the Jacobs Institute. So another example of usage might be brand name. So brand name, it's kind of hard to measure how often something is really used. There's some ways to do it. But I like brand because it means definitely it got bought, it made money for the company, but it also is recognized in a very positive way. So number one brand actually is Apple Computer, $100 billion in brand name. Who do you think is number two?
Coke.
Coke is maybe number three, but yeah? The next four are all about $50 billion. So Coke, who else is on the list? McDonald's is the top, is 6 or 7.
Disney.
IBM?
IBM. GE is later. Yeah, it's in the top 10. So believe it or not, number 2 is Microsoft. Who has not used a Microsoft product? Is there anyone here who has not used a Microsoft product? I mean, Control-Alt-Delete, how could that be a good design? Yet it actually is used for various reasons in terms of its ubiquitous. Number 3 on the list actually is Coca-Cola. Half of their brand value is the shape of the glass Coke bottle. And that shape is not so much used in the US anymore, but is still used in other countries. Next is IBM. IBM was waning in terms of brand name, and then there was one big initiative from what I call entrepreneurs within IBM that started a new initiative that really gave IBM a rise. And that was their Smart Planet initiative, looking at big data, looking at what you could do with big data, and how you can improve the planet and smart buildings with it. And then the last one is Google. Is there anyone who's not used Google? So this, I think, is a good measure of actually usage of the design. Another way that we talked about is performance. You know, does it have a high reliability rate, mean time to failure, for example? And there are many ways that we can measure reliability and performance. At a school like Berkeley, with a top engineering school, surely the Jacobs Institute must include top performance as one of the criterion that we should be using in evaluating design. Now, is that enough? There are different ways that you can measure performance, but we think of it in terms of Consumer Reports. We think of it in terms of, you know, the fastest plane, the fastest robot by weight, the Dash robot, or the cockroach robot. But there are many ways that we can measure performance for emerging regions as well. And so I give an example of the Darfur stove. Working with Ashok Gadgil, I've got a couple of students that are putting temperature monitors in the stoves, not only to see how they perform in the laboratory, but how they actually perform in Ethiopia and in Darfur as well. So performance is important, but it doesn't necessarily always have to be high-tech performance. We've also heard, I think, Mark, you mentioned awards, design awards. So critical acclaim. You come up with criteria. You have some involvement with the Webby Awards. Do you want to say anything about that? You know, so they develop criteria. Some of those go on to be really successful. I'm going to talk about the IDA Awards, the Gallery Awards, because they show up later in terms of evaluating design, but it's basically run by the Industrial Society of America. A criteria that I helped develop is for the Engineering Pathway, the Premier Award for Engineering Excellence in Courseware, and that criteria involves interaction design, good web design, and student learning. Can you really demonstrate that student learning has improved? And here's an example of one of the awardees, CAPME program for helping teams become better teams. It's being used by 5,000 faculty. It's 230,000 students have used it, and it's living in 53 countries so far in various design projects. So I'm going to get back to the IDA award and how that affects the value of design. But one point I want to make is as we, critical designers, come up with criteria, we set a culture that maybe take over the real meaning of the design. And so I think we always have to be careful about design awards that we aren't driving the design by the criteria of the award itself. Here's an example by a colleague of mine, Soren Petersen, who did some studies with classes in South Korea and also in Denmark. And what he did is he decided to give out criteria for the best designs. Judges come in, just like in my class, at the end of the semester. They come from industry and they judge the student projects. The criteria are shared at the beginning of the semester. But what he decided to do was actually have a gaming system in which the students themselves could vote on the best designs at the beginning of the semester. And even if it wasn't their design, their grade would go up if they voted for the top 3 designs. Okay, so this really was a case where there was a market for identifying the best designs according to the criteria. And it turns out by the 3rd week, 2 out of the 3 of the winning teams were actually pegged as being a top design by the other teams in the class. Now, they were designing for the criteria. So something to think about when we develop design criteria and critical acclaim, is it authentic? Is it really something that's measuring the right thing that we want? Because whatever we're teaching our students will be developed and we'll get results relative to the criteria that we set. So what about design process? That's what you mentioned. And financial impact. Well, in fact, in the very early days of measuring design, we thought about design for assembly and design for manufacture. And so the idea was that the design, which is the blue line here, doesn't cost much at the beginning of the design process, but it impacts the red line, which is the decisions that are made in design. In particular, very early on in the design process, we're making decisions that are going to impact final production and manufacturing. So a lot of design processes were built around how do you come up with multifunctional teams in the early stages of design so we can reduce the costs of manufacturing later on. Or another way to think about it is we make a mistake in the design in terms of the manufacturability, the cost of making changes go up exponentially, and thus putting a focus on a good design process at the beginning of the design stage. Well, what's happened with design thinking is looking more broadly to some of the issues you've talked about in terms of human-centered design. Is it really, are we designing the right items? Are we really helping people in the way that they want to be helped? Is it achieving the functionality that real people want? And there actually are, according to Pierce is the one that introduced me to these international standards, there actually are criteria that have been published for human-centered design, mostly associated with, are you sensitive to the customer? Are you sensitive to the context? Have you addressed the whole user experience? So Sarah Beckman and I have been team teaching design for close to 20 years now, starting in engineering and then in the Haas School of Business. And we've developed a design thinking process model that's built on the Kolb model of learning, with the idea that good teams, there's a duality between learning and design. And so all designers are learning something. They're learning about their customer, they're learning about different disciplines in the team, and thus design is a learning process, and design thinking is embedded in that learning process. What Kolb said is people have different learning preferences. Some people like to see concrete examples first, others like to go to abstract equations. Some people like to do the analysis, some people like to do the synthesis. And there's a preference that you might be in any one of these quadrants, but a good team needs people from all of these quadrants. And in fact, it will help all of us to develop our skills in each of those quadrants as well. So human-centered design starts down here with the concrete and the analysis stage. We observe people, we watch people, we talk to people, we interview people, we look at the data on people. Then we move up and try to gain insights from all of this design research and this data. What are the aha moments that we're getting from the data? And then we move over to what are the imperatives? What are the design rules that we might follow? What are some of the principles that will provide the foundation for creative design? And then we create these new designs, we prototype them, and then we go back over to this quadrant and we test them out again in a very concrete way. And we ask that the students in our class go through the cycle at least twice. So they'll come out with an initial prototype midterm, they'll test it out in terms of concept testing, and then they'll do it again at least one more time within the course of the semester. So there have been a number of studies that have looked at design processes. I'm not saying the one that I'm presenting is necessarily the best one, but there have been evaluations of just companies and organizations that have in place a design process that thinks about design and embeds design very early on in the design process and also engages organizations and management. Here's an example from the Product Development Institute that looks at the percentage of revenues that come from new products that use a design process and the percentage of products that come from new products that use it. And so the bottom 25% are the ones that bottom of a good design process, and the gold are the top 25%, and you can see a lot more of the profits and a lot more of the revenue come from companies that have a good design process. Here's another way to look at it. 1994 to 2004 is evidence from the Corporate Design Foundation that looked at the stock market prices of companies that follow good design processes. And they found something very similar. That top curve is the US Design Index, and the ones under, the one right here, I guess that's this one here, is the Dow Jones average. So those companies that had embedded a good design process did better on the market. So one way to measure a good design process might eventually be in sales and the stock price. Very similar results from the UK, in which the design index group at the top is the top line there versus the other companies in the UK. A very recent study, actually, that just came out is kind of interesting. what is the real value of design? And what they did is they came up with a portfolio of companies 10 years ago that they thought had very good design practices. And then they invested for $10 in this index to see how much money it would make in 10 years. And this is what they got. Relative to the S&P, the companies that were in their portfolio were much better by 228% than the S&P. And the companies they picked were these companies. Publicly traded companies in the US, integrated design, growth of design-related investment, embedding design thinking throughout the entire organization, leadership that value design, and senior-level commitment to the design process as well. A good percentage of those results, by the way, were due to Apple. So Apple drove it, but even if you took Apple out, this portfolio did very well relative to the S&P. So again, one way to measure design is its impact on the bottom line and its impact on the stock index. And this was a similar UK study that was conducted by the Design Council in the UK in 2012. It showed that for every pound invested in design, business can expect 20 times the revenue, 4 times the increase in operating profit, and 5 times basically its competitiveness internationally. So that's one way of measuring design. One aspect of design that I think is very important is what are the social impacts of your design? What are the social implications of your design? Have you done better for the world? And this poster, by the way, was for Ethics Week. This was my question at Ethics Week, which I thought the college did a very good job. But who are we designing for? Who is benefiting from the design are good questions to ask. How is the planet better off or worse off for your design? Is design the problem or the solution? As we have more and more cell phones piling up in China as we're buying the newest and latest, is this best for the planet? Is this good design? I would hope that through the Jacobs Institute, we think about some of these broader issues of design. Just a couple of projects from my classes just to illustrate how we can build in social implications in product design courses. Here's a project from a company, a nonprofit, that was very interested in building sustainable surfboards. And so they looked at how they could create better sustainable surfboards. It's kind of hard, the materials that are being used. You could go back to the old Hawaiian wooden surfboards, but they aren't going to give you the performance that you want. And so what they decided is what they would do is recycle used surfboards and give them to low-income kids to be used for training. And so this originally, Restoke started as a project in ME 110 and then to become a nonprofit. If you go to Santa Cruz, you want to use surfboard, that's the place to go. Another one, I promised the students that I met this morning that I would bring in real examples of this. This is WearPact. These were a couple of students in my graduate new product development course that was taught with the California College of Arts. And I think this shows the benefit of having art students, in this case a fashion design student, in the classroom as well to add to the experience and the multidisciplinary aspect of the design process. But these students, one of them being a mechanical engineering undergraduate student, by the way, really a mechanical engineering undergraduate student, was really disappointed with the lack of choices that men have in underwear. I don't know if you guys agree or not, white or black, you know, you don't get a whole lot of choice. Plus, the profit margin in underwear, you get a little piece of cotton or something and you're paying, you know, maybe it costs 20 cents to make and you're paying $10 for it. So they thought, as a business model, that if there was some way to get social causes in your underwear, you can communicate your values to intimate friends. There might even be cases where your underwear will show even regular life, you know, the pants without the belts. And plow back to social causes. This is a for-profit company, by the way. And what I like about this is this emphasizes that design doesn't need to be just products. Design could be products, services, websites. I think someone here mentioned experiences, like Disneyland is really an experience, and business models. New business models are what we need, particularly, I think, for sustainability for the planet. But WearPact has been quite a successful company. It had a fashion designer on the team from the California College of Arts. We have a trade show at the end of the semester, and one of the top Bay Area designers actually was at the trade show and judged them. and Yves Bahar, if you know who he is, and helped get them launched. And here's an example. I promised the students this morning that I would bring in a real example of their underwear. What do you think? Would you wear this? Yeah, okay. They thought, by the way, the student who's now CEO of the company that started the company as a mechanical engineer seriously considers the supply chain in the overall design. So he uses organic cotton from Turkey. He visits these Turkish facilities. He looks at the impact on the environment. He looks at the social implications of the factory and the working conditions. So he takes the whole thing seriously, including just sustainability in the packaging of it. So sometimes he'll use the material from the packaging of it, or has really thought about the whole life cycle of his product line. This is a commercial product, but it's a commercial product that has a social value, and they're able to publicize and gain the imagination of people through the causes. So they may have 3 or 4 causes a year. For instance, one of my favorite ones was when they did the Sierra Club. They plowed back money to the Sierra Club, and in order to publicize it, they had a Beta the Breakers run in your underwear. It got a lot of press. Here are some co-design projects. Yael Perez worked on one of these projects, but I think that co-design is something that can bring in a lot of students and help our students think about the social implications of design. So I talked a little bit of the Darfur Stove project. Just Milk is another project that I'm involved in to try to reduce HIV through breast nipples in Africa. Zimba is another project that I've worked on. And it's an interesting design project because we know that chlorine can kill many pathogens, particularly the pathogens that exist in North India, where this project was. But the design problem is, how do you not get too much chlorine in it, because people won't drink it because it doesn't taste good. But if you have too little chlorine, then it isn't going to do its job. And how do you maintain the chlorine levels over time in an emerging region that doesn't have huge infrastructure to support it? That is the whole idea of design, looking in the context of the challenges of emerging regions. Another project that we worked on, Seguro, was to reduce pesticide poisoning for farm workers in Central Valley, and then eventually we also looked at Mexico as well. And then the one I want to spend a little bit more time about is the CARES project, working with the Pinoleville Pomo Nation. And I like to use that because this is an example of what can be done with freshmen. This started as a freshman design project, and I'm of the firm belief that freshmen can design. In fact, maybe they're better designers coming in as freshmen because we drum out sometimes the creativity of them while they're going through our engineering programs. We need to retain, embody, continue the creativity the students have when they come in, but freshmen can be good designers. So let's see what I have on this. Let me tell you a little bit about this project. The Pinoleville Pomo Nation is about 2 hours north of here in Ukiah. They have about 80 to 90% unemployment. They were concerned because they were spending almost all of the little money they had on propane, so they were facing rising heating and cooling costs. They also had HUD housing that looks like trailers. They thought maybe they heard about formaldehyde in the trailers. They were really worried about the air quality. It had nothing to do with their cultural values, and they also have drought conditions in this area. So they came to the American Indian Student Science and Engineering Association to see if they could get some help in designing culturally sensitive housing for them. Now, the student organization were very theoretical. I think the president at the time was an astrophysicist and didn't quite know how he was going to help them, but he said there's this crazy professor in mechanical engineering that might be interested. And so I and Ryan Shelby and Yael Perez, were you there at the beginning? Yeah, the CARES project. It was a graduate. It was a result. The CARES project was your project in my graduate class. That's right. And so we worked with the tribal nation, developed workshop. I call it Innovation Workshop for Underserved Communities, so that we can empower design creativity in everybody. Everybody has creative capacity. And so how do we develop and draw on their creative capacity and their knowledge of their own needs? They are much better understanding their needs than we are as designers from UC Berkeley. And what came out of those was a kind of a reordering of what the top needs are. You can't see this as we separated the youth out because we wanted to hear everybody's voice. So we wanted to make sure we heard the youth voice. We wanted to make sure we heard the elder voice as well in the design process. And this is what came out in their top needs. Number one, actually, is they wanted to learn and use something from their heritage, natural materials that they thought were sustainable. And then the rest of it would follow in terms of energy conservation and water conservation. There was an issue of both privacy and roundness, exercise, storage. They do dancing. They wanted to be able to store their costumes and so on. So what happened with the freshman design class, this was their first design. Is anyone here from that class, by the way? Cindy, there you are. She was a freshman in the class. In fact, that's Cindy right here. So she was in that freshman design class. It was called E10 then, and I hope the Jacobs Institute can refix and bring back E10 as a good freshman design course. But this is an example of low prototyping. And the reason that you want to do low prototyping with the Pinellaville Pomo Nation, or in fact most of our customers, is you want people, the customer, to criticize them, to feel it's low fidelity and they can feel free to criticize. So in this case, I don't know if you can see it, but this is the coffee cup holder. This was the top of a salad container, a lot of balsa wood glued together. But they were able to use this to get the concept across of circular design where everything would go around the kitchen and the living room, but there was still privacy for the individual bedrooms was sort of the concept, and there were various renewable energy options in the whole process. I thought this was the greatest tribute to the contribution of the students' design. So I forget how long it was afterwards, but not too long after the students presented their design to the Pinellaville Pomo Nation, they took it on themselves to build this. And it looks very, very similar to that design. This was a greenhouse sort of built on that model. They managed to get donations for the wood, recycled wood to be used for it, but very similar concept in the architectural design. So this is an example of a freshman project that ended up getting close to $2 million funding from the Department of Energy and HUD, and was co-designed with the tribal nation, co-built. We learned how to build a straw bale house, and is now being co-evaluated in terms of, is it really achieving the design goals and the energy goals that they hope to have. In addition to the culturally sensitive human-centered design aspects of it, we definitely did all the calculations to understand the renewable energy needs as well. So it's got geothermal heat pumps that takes advantage of temperature difference below the earth, solar electric, solar thermal, energy conservation, and water harvesting. We looked at microhydro because they do own a river, but it just didn't look like it had enough water year-round to provide much energy. We also looked at wind energy. They also have a grant for the electric vehicle green corridor, looking at the patchwork of tribal lands and can they have electric vehicles that go across those. The Smithsonian also did a case study on this project where they evaluated impact and looked at different aspects of impact, and these are some of the results that they came out with. It was featured in the American Indian Museum, Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian. Impact for a freshman design project I thought was pretty good. And also won critical acclaim. There were several awards that we won for it. But I think the best way of measuring impact in a case like this is from the voice of the customer. So I'll see if I can't play a few lines of a video that the Sloan Foundation did of this project and other projects that are associated with engineers and business for sustainability. Okay, yes, that's what I'm doing. Can I get here? Is it one of these things? Sorry, I had it cubed up to the right place and oh well, I will just start over. So the Luce Foundation funded the Engineers and Business for Sustainability graduate certificate program. Arpad Horvath is the lead on it, and I'm one of the co-PIs on it. And after the end of the funding and starting that project, they did a video of some of the projects in the program. And so I'll just fast forward.
And policy and law.
I really love working in interdisciplinary environments because I think if we're going to solve sustainability problems, we need to bring in the appropriate disciplines. The reason that I like working with the Haas School of Business is sustainability has different legs. And certainly there's the environmental sustainability, but you can't sustain something unless you can sustain it financially over time as well. We never imagined that students beyond engineering and business would want to be in the certificate program. And now we have students from law, we have students from sociology, we have students from the College of Natural Resources.
Up to now, 70 students have received the certificate, and we have approximately 30 students signed up to receive it in the next 1 to 2 years.
One reason for the growth of the EBS program is the demand from industry. There's been more motivation to really take the triple bottom line seriously.
If you're a master's student and you get this certificate, you've gotten a pretty good basis for sustainability education. So you can certainly bring that to industry. If you go on to do a PhD, you've got that foundation. So when you take some of the more advanced courses.
So I want to move forward to actually hear from the Pomo Nation is what I'm trying to do. Lillyville Pomo Nation, and we're working on building the culturally sensitive sustainable home that was developed as part of these EBS classes. I use what's called a human-centered design technique, and that means we make the humans the center focal point of any of the building of the design, and then the technology follows. And in that kind of process, we look at all the different legs of sustainability: economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and then social sustainability. And it turns out on this project, social sustainability was really important.
Back in 2007, I took a class with Professor Alice Agogino. It was called Sustainable Product Development. And in this class, we brought together engineers, architects, sociologists, and also some business majors. And our goal is to really come up with how can we actually create an idea that you could actually turn into a real organization or a real business. How do you actually help people improve their current level of sustainability? These local communities wanted to be able to partner with other organizations to, one, not only quantify their current level of sustainability, but actually start designing and implementing these solutions.
The students came in and did not pose as experts right away, and that allowed the tribe to assert its kind of cultural principles, its ideas about technology, its ideas about social life.
I'm very excited about seeing this project done. I come up here every day and look at it and just think, wow, you know, looking at the hay bales and thinking about the insulation and trying to think of how could, in the future, could we get a little bit greener? You know, I don't know, you know, but it's exciting.
It's a tribe that believes that sustainability is key to their long-term survivability in this country. What do they actually mean by sustainability? Or when they said they wanted energy and water efficient buildings, well, what does that actually mean? Going through this co-design process, we've been able to realize that when they talk about sustainability, it's not just about greenhouse gas emissions, or it's not just about, let's say, embedded water. It's around these concepts of tribal sovereignty, concepts of economic self-sufficiency and environmental harmony.
You know, being a Native American person, I was raised with a close awareness to the Mother Earth and of our effect. And living here, I've always wanted to be a little more gentler in the way that we live, you know. This project, you know, the house being a straw bale, passive solar, and the water catchment, you know, gray water systems, fits right into a dream that I've always had. It's really important to me that we have a say in the things that we build for our future. You know, we just had a blessing ceremony yesterday. It was the first time my wife and my kids had seen anything. I mean, I remember I told my wife, you know, this would be obviously a great opportunity for us to get a little closer to nature. And her first response was, well, how close are we going to get?
We realized early on that one of their criteria for what sustainable housing would be, it means that it has to include usage of natural materials. And we realized that straw bale and also tule was material that they use in some of their traditional homes. So they really want to incorporate a lot of that into these new homes that they're building now. The goal is to show that these homes actually will have at least a 30% savings on electricity usage and roughly a 25% savings on water usage. And the plan is to take this model and then use it to build an additional 2 homes. And if those homes work well, and if we still are saving those energy and water consumption reduction, the plan is to take those designs and expand out to build an additional 23 new homes.
They call Ryan Uncle Ryan, my kids. My kid wants to be an engineer. Kinala, the one that's here with me today, they play Legos together.
They have a young kid aspiring to go to Berkeley to be an engineer. That's a big thing, and the collaboration has had a lot to do with that. I
think I'll stop there, but you get the idea that part of design is what's impact to the environment and to society as well. And listening to the actual customer is a great way to really understand the impact. The other aspect that I wanted to talk about is we can do these projects, but they're very time consuming. I mean, when Cindy and I and the students went down to the Pinoleville Pomo Nation, we had to carve out basically a whole day. And not everybody can afford to do that. And I'm really interested in Amartya Sen's concept of development of freedom. And Yale Prez really helped me think about design as freedom as well, because if you don't have the wherewithal to be able to design solutions to your problems, then you don't have the freedom to get there. And so what Yale did with their dissertation PhD was to look at how might we do something that we did similar to the Pinoleville Pomo Nation, but can we do it remotely and somehow crowdsource it so that it is available to the rest of the world, designers across the rest of the world to actually do the design. And so she set up a competition called Participlace. People submitted, she set up a website, they got videos from the tribal nation. She looked at different media to see which ones would be most effective to get across the sense of place. Her dissertation was Global Architects Meet the Place, Bridging Gap Through ICT. She looked at 37 teams registered, only 17 came through at the final end of the process, but they came up with some absolutely remarkable designs. And then we had a design ceremony for the winners at Siddharjadai Hall. Now, this is one thing that I think was really interesting about the process, and it gets back to critical acclaim and the criteria we use as designers and the culture that we create about what we value in design. In this case, what Yale did is she looked at designers' self-assessment on how well they did relative to the criteria. So that's what the blue line here is, the self-assessment. Then they looked at the professional jury that actually evaluated the design, and that's the red line up there, and you can see that they pretty much follow. The students' the designer's self-evaluation pretty much paralleled what the professional jury said. But if you look at the green line, that's what the Pinoleville Pomo Nation said was important in design. And I'll bring up one example. Why was there, one thing that Yale looked at is why was there a difference between the professional designer's evaluation and critical acclaim and what the users actually said? And if you remember Carl Ulrich's talk when he was looking at predicting who would buy products in the market, well, random sampling of users probably can do a better job of at least deciding whether quirky products get purchased or not. But here's one interesting one that won first place with critical acclaim. They're a basket-making culture. They pretty much had a design for a living community center that had a feel, the texture, the look of their culture. But here's another design from the country of Georgia, by the way. And I don't think they had ever been to the Pinoleville Pomo. Never been there. So from the country of Georgia, they went through some of the media that Yale set up on them. And they looked at the rolling hills of Northern California and looked at what the Pinoleville Pomo Nation and their basket culture and said, oh, we really want to have a green roof so it looks like the rolling hills of California and it really blends into it. Do you think that was a good design that they came up with? Did a good job of doing that, and so did the Pinoleville Pomo Nation. They thought it was good. But the critics didn't like it. Why? It wasn't original. So one of the valuing of designs we talked about, is it novel, is it original? Well, sometimes that's a good thing. But if you're trying to design for other people, do they care whether it's original or not if it's a good design? It looked too much like the California Academy of Science in their mind. So they felt it wasn't original, but the Pinellaville Pomo Nation really, really liked the design. So something to keep in mind when we look at originality as something we really value in design. Briefly with Open IDEO, what Pierce talked about, we thought we'd look at another open source community and see what their impact could be in design if you bring designers from all around the world. How might we establish better recycling habits at home is one example of the current design challenge that they're running. They've had 24 challenges. They've got 60,000 people registered and approximately 5,000 design participants. Mark Fuse over there, his PhD dissertation was to scrape all the data from this open source site and analyze it, slice it, dice it, and visualize it in many ways. Show you a few examples of it, but in crowdsourcing, this is just, I don't know why I've got that slide, I'll go on. I don't know why I've got it. Okay, so what Mark looked at was just what is the social network of Open IDEO and how might it contribute to better design and how might it be designed better so that you can build on other ideas. And he built on the Mason and Watts paper on collaborative networks that basically says that if you have maximal clustering, then you've got clicks. You're not getting out of groupthink. So you've got small groups of people working together on a design but not learning from totally new ideas from other groups. If you really want to be good for idea generation, you want minimal clustering. And so what he did is he analyzed, the left-hand side is looking at the social network, people as the unit of analysis, and who's building on each other's work. And this one is looking at the ideas as a unit of analysis and which ideas get built on. It's kind of interesting. There's sort of a core here in the middle of ideas that get built on a lot, and then a number of ideas that are in the periphery that people are not building on as well. We looked at the correlation of these ideas to see which ones might be more likely to win the final challenge and really didn't find any strong correlation whether you're in the center or whether you're in the periphery. So I want to play a video, and Mark, you're welcome to step up and say anything you want about this video. You got it, Alex. Maybe. Here we go. Okay, so in the visualization, he's just looking at, for instance, one idea and how other people are building on that idea and how it might reach out to get to the periphery. But it shows you how the ideas relate to each other. And then we're going to look at the ideas over time and how they build on each other. So an initial idea, this shows how this idea here in the center is building on all these other ideas. And if you move forward in the video, you're seeing how that idea then gets built on by others in the process. So now to Pierce's work, and using the ISO standards for human-centered design, one question that we had, and here's an example of a design challenge. There were several challenges that Pierce looked at. He was very interested in poverty areas, and so he was interested in design challenges that were emerging region challenges. This is one example of them. And he categorized these challenges according to the number of inspirations, which really had to do with the human-centered design, the observing the user, understanding the user, how many concepts were generated, how many winners came out of those concepts. He picked the total number of winners as 38 and then randomly selected 38 from those that were the non-winners in the process. And these are the results in terms of the statistical correlation between design process criteria and whether they won or not. It was statistically significant that the winners built on a lot more ideas than the non-winners. Anything you want to add? How many ideas? It's interesting. There was only average of 2 ideas for the winners versus the non-winners, but I think you got to keep in mind that there were, 800 ideas that they were building on. I mean, there were a lot of ideas because it was a crowdsourced, so the ideas were out there. Did they actively elicit feedback on the prototype? Was very important. 20% versus 1%. So the winners were more likely to get feedback. Remember the design thinking cycle, get feedback on the prototype, and they went in deeper in the sense that they also went further to answer the questions that they got in the crowdsourced environment. So I think there's hope for open IDEO type websites where we crowdsource design as well for greater impact. So I've summarized some ways that we can measure value design. The question now is, what do we value with the Jacobs Institute, and how do we want to measure it? So I'd like to hear from you.
Questions?
So you talked about how the triple bottom line, or at least the bottom line, was affected by the measure of how companies were developing a design process in-house. Can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe give an example or two? We talked about Coke and Apple and everything, but could you give an example of what exactly is the design process, and who failed and why, and who succeeded?
How does an organization?
What they really did look was the organizational structure and the impact of design. And the IDEA study in particular was looking at the role of industrial design. So industrial design used to be, or design used to be, designed with what sometimes we call a small d. It was just ergonomics. You looked at how nice it looked at the artistic side of it. And this change in thinking about the design process that they're evaluating is when design permeated the entire organization. So it was designed with a big D. Did they involve customers? Did they involve human-centered design? Did the leadership support the design process? Was it embedded in the critical operations of the company?
Hi. My question is that when you compare the stock price kind of thing and the design, and also in the last case, the OpenIDEO, the designs for like communication design and product design and a web design, these are also different types of design, like, or the purposes are so different. So in studies like this, in case of evaluation, how you consider that kind of factors, or you don't consider that kind of factors? So that's my question.
Okay. Well, depending on which metric you're looking at, for the stock market prices, they were looking at the whole company and the organization and what role design played. And it didn't matter whether it was Coca-Cola or Apple or service design. So as I said, design can be a product, it can be a service, it can be a website, it can be an experience, it can be a business model. So they were looking at all of those. IDEA, when they do the design evaluations, they have different categories. So they have consumer products, they may have services. But I think that really raises the question of should the Jacobs Institute consider design more broadly than even that? And we were just having a discussion on bridge design and the context of ethics and social implications that are associated with design across the board. And I think that's something that's very important for us to be educating students in the design world on as well. Did you want to add anything?
No, I think it's fine.
Hi, Rachel Dezonbeck. Often you have to have trade-offs between different elements in the triple bottom line. How do you navigate those trade-offs? How do you choose which bottom line to prioritize? And what does the Jacobs Design Institute hope to value most out of the triple bottom line?
You know, whenever I do this good design, bad design activity in my classes somehow, and the students will complain about something, and then I'll say, well, why do you think they did that? Because there probably was a trade-off somewhere. But I think what's really exciting about design is using that challenge to innovate. And this is actually Jeremy Faluti's message. Do you want to say your message? That this can cause innovation in design, right? The challenge of doing it all well can challenge us to innovate and go beyond the current paradigm.
Any other question?
So, it is possible. For instance, what I love is the Rosenfeld effect when he looked at refrigerator design in the U.S. Has anybody seen that study? It's an amazing study. And, the idea was that somehow if you're sustainable in design, it's going to cost you more money, or it's going to cost you in performance. And what he looked at was when the state of California instituted energy efficiency in refrigerators, it forced the GEs and the Westinghouses to the challenge that you're talking about. How can you create better refrigerator design that is more energy efficient, costs less, and has higher performance. And that's what they did exactly. And the amount of money that was saved over those years, the amount of energy was greater, I think, than the Three Gorges Dam put together, all of the renewable energy during the time period that he had studied it. Just the negawatts, the energy conservation by meeting a design challenge, by rather than thinking of the current paradigm, and there always are trade-offs, and not to say that there aren't trade-offs, but you can use it as a compelling case to innovate, to try to go beyond those trade-offs. You know, they used to have butter warmers in refrigerators. Can you believe that?
I love that you bring up brand design as an element in this whole piece. I'm curious in your research on OpenIDEO and other sources, have you thought about storytelling and its role in evaluating the value of design? Since those OpenIDEO concepts that have a really cool HD video probably get a lot more votes than those that have poorly written, grammatically incorrect copy. And any thoughts on that?
Well, clearly storytelling is important. It's hard to tell a good story if you don't have a good thing to tell a story about, I like to think. So I think you need to do the two together. Actually, in my class on Thursday, that was the subject of the class on Thursday, was storytelling. And I really enjoyed it because I brought in one of the coaches from industry that heads up one of the design firms and also is co-author of Naked Innovation to help me out with the storytelling aspect. And we looked at a couple of ways you tell a story and what is effective and what isn't effective. And this is one reason I think the Jacobs Institute would really gain benefit from the multidisciplines across the campus by involving rhetoric, for instance, that are adept at storytelling, bringing in the artists and the architects that are adept at emotive goals, reaching emotive goals, and so on. And so I think that's important as well.
I think that when we look at the design, in most cases, design is done by a team. Mm-hmm. So the number of people are interacting to get this design materialized and get the final goal. The way these team members interact, or the way the decision is made, who is going to do what, when, and how the work of each team member is going to be evaluated by itself needs the design. In other words, my question is there a good design on how a design team, as far as human interaction between the team members, should work? Is it like top-down? Is it a democratic way? Is it just chaotic guerrilla war that you just do your best and hope that the final product?
You know, that's a wonderful question. And there is no one model, right? I mean, there are all kinds of different examples of successful design teams. What we try to look at in our design classes is how do we create high-performing teams, regardless of what model they use. And so I think it just doesn't happen automatically. I mean, the students, you know, what was that study that 90% of design team experiences suck and 10% don't, or something like that, is that you can teach how to improve your teamwork. And so I think that's important in design and important for the Jacobs Institute. And we might want to bring in experts doing that. I've been working with Barbara Waugh, for instance, who is head of human resources for HP. She's been working with a couple of classes. Is she working with anyone else's class here? I know she was working with Eric's class for a while. But she has a lot of experience working at teams at HP. And we have a number of team exercises to try to help build the teamwork and the team issues and how to strengthen a team. Doesn't mean that they're all doing great and loving each other, by the way. So some of our research on teamwork has shown that teams that get along great and don't criticize each other don't do well either. And that's what groupthink is all about. That they like having a good time, they don't want to criticize each other, and they don't really get beyond the rote. They don't have the insight. Whereas teams that challenge each other, but constructively challenge each other and give feedback. Listen to the customer, because the customer basically is challenging them as well. The customer is telling them that design won't work, I don't like it. I mean, that's a challenge to a design team. And they've got to go back and listen to that feedback from the customer in addition to the internal feedback from the team and use that constructively to strengthen the team and to strengthen the design. But it doesn't happen automatically. And so I do think it's important that we teach good teamwork in the Jacobs Institute.
Let's thank Professor Agogino again.